Isabel Weatherly stood at Samuel Cannon's door with soot on her sleeve, mud to her knees, and a little girl clutching her skirt as if heaven had sent her down the road. "Are you the wife Pa prayed for?" the child begged, her eyes red from crying and her small hand trembling around a rag doll with one button eye. Behind her, the Texas wind pushed dust and rain across the porch boards, and inside the house a lonely lamp burned over an untouched supper. Samuel Cannon filled the doorway like a man carved out of grief, one hand on the latch, the other stiff at his side. He looked at Isabel's torn satchel, the bruise near her temple, and the child's desperate hope. "Before we begin, leave your country name below, and tell me where this western night is reaching you. Subscribe if stories of rejected brides, protective cowboys, and hard-earned love keep you listening." The little girl's question fell into the house and stayed there. Isabel Weatherly could not answer it. Her throat had gone dry miles ago, somewhere between the burned remains of her uncle's claim and the road that forked towards Sweetwater Crossing. She had walked until her shoes split. She had carried her satchel until the handle broke. She had followed the child's frightened directions through mesquite and slick clay, because leaving a 5-year-old alone beside the road was something no decent soul could do. Now she stood before the child's father, and the shame of her condition rose hotter than fever. Her dress had once been gray. After the fire, the rain, and the mud, it looked like a rag dragged from an ash heap. One sleeve was torn at the shoulder. A scorched ribbon hung loose from her bonnet. Her hair, dark and heavy, had come undone and clung to her cheek. Worst of all, the single keepsake she had managed to save from the fire, her mother's little silver thimble, had worn a hole through her pocket and pressed cold against her thigh, as if reminding her that she owned almost nothing else. Samuel Cannon stared down at his daughter. "Annie," he said, his voice low and rough, "step back from the lady." The child did not move. "She found me, Pa. I went to the creek for Dolly's ribbon and couldn't find the trail. She brought me home." Samuel's jaw tightened, but not with anger at the child. Isabel saw fear flash across his face so quick, a careless person might have missed it. His eyes moved over Annie's wet hair, her muddy stockings, the scrape on her elbow. Then they moved back to Isabel, colder now, guarded. "I take you," he said. "But this is no place to be wandering after dark." "I was not wandering for pleasure, Mr. Cannon." The name came from the child, spoken again and again during their walk. "Pa will be worried. Pa don't like strangers. Pa prays when he thinks I'm sleeping." Pa said, "My bay. God remembers us even if folks don't." Samuel looked at the road behind her. "Where's your rig?" "I had none. Your people. Not near enough to claim me." That answer made him frown. Men in frontier country listen for trouble, the way horses listened for thunder. A woman alone at night meant a story. A woman alone at night with soot on her clothes meant a story. No house wanted crossing its threshold. Annie tugged Isabel's ruined skirt. "Tell him about the smoke." Isabel swallowed. "My uncle's place burned this morning. He died last winter. I stayed to settle what little remained, but a man named Harlan Pike came with papers, saying the land belonged to him for debt. I asked for a day to pack. By noon the shed was burning. By evening, the house caught too." Samuel's eyes sharpened at Pike's name. "Pike was there? With 2 riders." He said, "Old boards catch easy in dry weather." "It rained before sundown, I guess." The little girl leaned harder against Isabel. "She gave me her shawl, Pa." Samuel noticed then that Isabel had no shawl. Annie had it wrapped around her shoulders, smoke-stained and too large, but warm. Something in his face shifted, not softened exactly. It was more like a locked gate had rattled in the wind. "Come in out of the rain," he said. Isabel did not move. She had learned that every offer carried a hook if a person was desperate enough. "I do not mean to be a burden. You already brought my child home." He opened the door wider, not smiling. "That puts me in your debt, whether I like it or not." The words were not tender, but the lamp behind him glowed golden. and beyond the doorway, Isabel smelt coffee, wood smoke, and beans gone cold. The house was plain but solid, with a braided rug by the hearth, and a row of small boots set neatly beneath a peg. There were no signs of a woman's hand except in things preserved too carefully. A blue cup on a shelf, a faded apron folded over a chair, dried lavender tied near the window. A dead wife's house, Isabel thought. Annie slipped inside first and looked back anxiously. "Pa," she whispered, "can she stay? Just tonight? She ain't got a house anymore." Samuel's mouth tightened at the word stay. Isabel knew that look. She had seen it on church women when she asked for work, on station men when she could not pay freight for her trunk, on the mercantile owner when he saw Pike's riders watching her from across the street. A woman without protection was not pitied long. She was questioned. "I can sleep in the barn," Isabel said quickly. Samuel's eyes flicked to hers. "I wasn't fixing to put you in the barn." But a moment later, after he brought Annie a blanket and sent her to change stockings, he led Isabel not to a bedroom, but to the small washroom off the kitchen. He set a basin of warm water on a crate, placed a towel beside it, then left the door partly open as though even kindness had rules around it. "There's bread on the table," he said. "Coffee, if you can stand it boiled too long. I'll ride you into town at first light. Reverend Wells will know where to place you." Place her. The word landed hard. Isabel looked down at her burned sleeve and bit back the answer that rose in her. She had been placed all her life. Placed with an aunt after her mother died. Placed with her uncle when the aunt remarried. Placed behind sewing tables, sick beds, cook stoves, and church charity baskets. Now here was another man, not cruel, only careful, already planning where she could be set down so she would not disturb the order of his house. "Thank you," she said. Samuel paused, as if he heard what she did not say. "I'm not an ungrateful man, Miss Weatherly. No, I can see that. But I have a child. I know. I carried her over a washout when the creek rose." His face changed again, struck by the picture of it. Outside, thunder rolled low across the prairie. Annie came pattering back in dry stockings, hair loose around her face. She climbed into the chair beside Isabel as if they were kin and pushed the bread plate toward her. She said, "Pa forgets. Ladies need telling different than horses." Isabel almost laughed, but the sound caught in her chest and turned into a cough. Samuel poured coffee into the blue cup, then stopped. For a second he stared at it as though his own hand had betrayed him. He reached instead for a tin cup and filled that. Annie saw. So did Isabel. The child's face fell. "That was Ma's cup." "I know what it was," Samuel said. The room went quiet. Isabel took the tin cup with both hands. "This is fine." But Annie's eyes filled. "Ma would we've liked her." Samuel's chair scraped back. "Enough." The command was not loud, but it struck the child like a slap. Annie lowered her head. Isabel's tiredness vanished beneath a sudden flare of anger. She knew grief could make people hard. She knew loss could narrow a heart, until even a child's hope had no room to stand. Still, the little girl's shoulders were shaking. She asked a question out of fear. Isabel said softly. Samuel looked at her. "A question that doesn't belong to strangers." "No, but a child lost in the dark might grab any lantern she sees." His eyes hardened, then shifted away. For a moment Isabel thought he would send her out after all. Instead, he took his hat from the peg. "I'll check the horses." He left through the back door into the rain. Annie sat still until his footsteps faded. Then she whispered, "I didn't mean to make him mad. I know. Pa used to sing." Isabel looked toward the door. "When Ma was alive," Annie nodded. "Now he only prays, mostly for patience, sometimes for help. Once he prayed for a wife, but then he said he didn't mean it and asked God not to listen." That pierced Isabel in a place she had not guarded. She looked at the little girl, at the rag doll, at the lamp trembling in the draught. "God hears the first prayer and the frightened one after it," she said. "Which one do you think he keeps?" Isabel brushed mud from the child's sleeve. "My bae, the one that saves a child from the road." Samuel returned near midnight, with wet shoulders and a face closed against the world. He found Annie asleep with her head in Isabel's lap, the rag doll tucked between them. Isabel sat upright, afraid to move, one hand resting lightly on the child's hair. He stopped in the doorway. For the first time since she had arrived, he looked not suspicious, not dutiful, but wounded. "I tried to keep her safe," he said, so quietly she almost missed it. She knows. No, she knows how to find holes in fences and grief in men." Isabel did not answer. He crossed the room and lifted Annie gently. The child murmured, "Is she?" Samuel's eyes met Isabel's over his daughter's head. "Tonight," he said. But when he carried Annie down the hall, he left the kitchen door open, and the rain beat at the roof like knuckles, asking to be let in. Morning brought no kindness from the town. Samuel hitched the wagon at first light and drove Isabel and Annie toward Sweetwater Crossing beneath a sky washed pale and cold. Isabel wore a borrowed coat too broad in the shoulders and pinned set with a nail Samuel had bent for the purpose. Annie sat pressed against her side. Samuel held the reins with both hands and said little. The prairie showed its teeth after a storm. Wheel ruts brimmed with brown water. Thorn bushes glittered. Cattle stood dark against the grass. In the distance, Isabel saw the smoke-black smudge of her former home, and she turned her face away before Annie could notice. At the edge of town, a woman in a feathered hat paused outside the mercantile and stared. By the time Samuel stopped before the church, 3 more faces had appeared in windows. Reverend Wells was sweeping mud from the steps. He was a spare man with kind eyes that had learned caution from too many committees. "Samuel," he said, "Annie, and this is Isabel Weatherly." Samuel answered. "She found Annie on the road and brought her home. Her place burned. She needs help finding work or passage." The Reverend looked at Isabel with quick pity, then passed her toward the mercantile, where whispers had already gathered. "I heard about the Weatherly claim." "Then you heard it burned?" "I heard there was dispute." "There was fire," Isabel said. "Dispute came wearing boots before it." The Reverend's broom stilled. Before he could answer, Harlan Pike stepped from the mercantile porch with a cigar unlit between his teeth. He was a broad man dressed better than the weather required, with silver on his vest and cruelty in the clean line of his gloves. 2 riders lounged behind him. "Well now," Pike called. "Miss Weatherly survived the smoke." Samuel's shoulders squared. Isabel felt Annie's hand slip into hers. Pike came down the steps. "Reverend, careful where you spend your charity. That woman's uncle died owing money. He never meant to repay. She stayed on land she had no right to. When told to leave, she made a spectacle. Now she shows up at a widower's house after dark." The words moved through the street like a thrown handful of burrs. Isabel felt each one catch. Samuel did not look at her. That hurt more than Pike's smile. Reverend Wells cleared his throat. "Miss Weatherly, the ladies' committee might have sewing. Perhaps a bed, Mrs. Dobbs, for 2 nights?" "2 nights?" Annie cried. "She saved me." Pike laughed. "Children are easy fooled by a pretty rescue." Samuel turned then. "Leave my daughter out of your mouth." The street quieted. Pike lifted both hands in false peace. No insult meant tannin, just warning a neighbor. A lonely man with a child can be led where he don't intend to go. Isabel stepped back. "I will not be the cause of trouble." Samuel's face was stone. "You already are." The words were not shouted. They were worse for being plain. Isabel looked at him, and the cold that ran through her had nothing to do with weather. She knew he meant trouble had found them. Not that she herself was trouble. At least she wanted to believe it. But the street had ears, and humiliation did not stop to ask after meaning. Annie began to cry. Samuel seemed to realize too late how his words had sounded. "Miss Weatherly." "No." Isabel gently freed her hand from Annie's. "You have done enough, more than most would." She walked toward the church steps, holding herself upright, because Pike was watching, and because poor women were allowed so few dignities that dropping one felt like death. Behind her, Samuel said, Reverend, see that she's fat. The shame of it burned. Fed, placed, warned over, not defended. Inside the church, the air smelled of damp wool and hymnals. Reverend Wells offered a chair near the stove and spoke gently of patience, forgiveness, and the Lord opening windows when doors closed. Isabel listened with folded hands. Through the window, she saw Samuel's wagon roll away. Annie twisted around in the seat until distance swallowed her. Mrs. Dobb took Isabel in for the price of mending 12 shirts and hemming 2 petticoats by Friday. She gave her a narrow cot in a room off the pantry and warned that respectable houses locked their doors at 9. By noon, the story had grown. Isabel had burned her uncle's house to hide debts. Isabel had chased Samuel Cannon's child for favor. Isabel had spent the night under a widower's roof and left wearing his coat. At the mercantile, Mr. Abel refused to extend thread on credit. At the station, the clerk told her the eastbound train to Fort Worth had left before breakfast, and the next would not come for 3 days. The ticket cost more than she had even before the fire. The trunk she had shipped 2 weeks earlier, full of her sewing tools and winter dresses, had been held for unpaid freight. By evening, her hands shook from hunger and needlework. That was when Samuel came to Mrs. Dobb's back door with a sack of flour, coffee, and bacon wrapped in paper. Mrs. Dobb called Isabel from the pantry with a look sharp enough to skin a pear. "Your cowboy is here. He is not mine. He brought enough to make folks think otherwise." Isabel went to the door. Samuel stood on the step, hat in hand. Rain had darkened the brim. He looked at the sack, then at her. "I spoke rough this morning. I meant Pike was trouble. I know what you meant now, but not then." No, he accepted that like a deserved blow. "I brought these for Mrs. Dobb. Payment for your keep. My keep is not yours to pay. Annie hasn't eaten supper, says she won't until I make right." Despite herself, Isabel's heart moved. That child should not go hungry because her father has poor manners. I told her that, and she said poor manners made you go hungry first. Isabel looked away before he could see the tears that rose too quickly. Samuel set the sack down. "I have no call asking anything of you, but my housekeeper left in March. Annie burns oatmeal. I burn everything else. And the ranch hands eat like men punished for crimes. I can pay wages for cooking and mending. Separate room, proper arrangement. Reverend Wells can write terms. You may leave when you choose." Isabel stared at him. It was help. It was also dangerous. A woman whispered about could not stop whispers by returning to the house that made them. Yet, wages meant her trunk. Food meant strength. Work meant something more honest than charity. "Why?" she asked. Samuel's answer came slow. "Because my daughter asked if you were the wife I prayed for, and I answered by making you feel like a stray dog." The honesty startled her. "I am not asking you to be that," he added. "A wife." He looked toward the yard. "No." The word was firm, too firm. Isabel nodded once. "Then I will come as hired help. Nothing more. I want the terms written. You'll have them, and I will not be hidden like shame." His eyes returned to hers. "No," he said. "You want." The next morning, she rode back to the Cannon Ranch, seated beside Mrs. Dobb, who had appointed herself witness and protector, though she seemed disappointed that no scandal presented itself during the drive. Reverend Wells had written the terms in ink. Samuel signed first. Isabel signed with her head high. Mrs. Dobb signed as witness. Annie drew a crooked heart at the bottom until Samuel quietly covered it with his palm and said contracts were not for hearts. Isabel noticed. Annie noticed too. The Cannon Ranch sat in a shallow valley where live oaks bent with the wind and cattle trails crossed like old scars. The house was larger than Isabel had thought in the dark. Whitewashed boards, green shutters, stone chimney, smokehouse out back, barn with a sagging door, and a kitchen garden gone mostly to weeds. There was money here once, or the bones of it. There was neglect too. 3 ranch hands watched from the corral. One tipped his hat, one grinned. The oldest, a bow-legged man named Toby Fitch, said, "Boss, you finally hired someone who looks mean enough to make coffee right." Isabel looked him over. "I make coffee strong enough to forgive insults, not weak enough to invite them." Toby slapped his knee and laughed. Samuel almost smiled, then seemed to remember he did not do that anymore. Work began before her satchel touched the floor. Isabel found a kitchen full of flour weevils, cracked crocks, burned pans, and a stove that smoked because no one had cleaned the pipe. Annie followed her everywhere, eager as a pup, explaining which chair was mass, which spoon Pa hated, which window rattled, and where mice came through when the north wind blew. Isabel listened. She asked before moving the blue cup. She did not touch the folded apron, but she opened the windows, scrubbed the stove, sorted beans, set dough to rise, and tied a cloth around her hair like a woman ready to wrestle sorrow itself. Samuel came in near noon and stopped at the threshold. The kitchen smelled of bread, not biscuits burned black on the bottom, not coffee boiled bitter enough to float horseshoes. Bread, beans with onion, salt pork fried crisp, a pie made from dried apples Annie found in a crock. Annie stood on a chair dusting flour across the table and herself. "I help, I see that," Samuel said. Isabel expected him to scold the mess. Instead, he looked at his daughter's flour-white hands and swallowed hard. "Wash before dinner," he said. The hands came in quietly, then not quietly at all after the first bite. Toby closed his eyes over the beans and said, "I hear angels tuning fiddles." Samuel told him to hush, but there was no bite in it. That evening, Isabel mended shirts on the porch, while Annie leaned against her knee. Samuel worked near the barn, tightening a hinge that had needed fixing for months. The sunset spread red over the pasture. Cattle lowed in the distance. For one fragile hour, the world felt as if it had not burned. Then a rider appeared at the gate. Harlan Pike. Samuel saw him and set down the hammer. "Stay on the porch," he called. Isabel stood anyway. Pike rode in slow, letting his horse kick dust. "Evening, Cannon. Heard you took in my tenant." "She was never your tenant. Dad says otherwise." "Dad doesn't light matches." Pike smiled. "Careful. Accusations need proof." Isabel stepped down from the porch. "So do claims." Pike's gaze slid over her. "You got bold under a rich man's roof." Samuel moved before the insult finished. He did not draw a gun. He did not shout. He simply walked between them, and the force of his silence made Pike's horse sidestep. "State your business." "I came for what sewed." Weatherly had a trunk held at the station. "I paid the freight. Contents now belong to me against debt." Isabel felt the blood leave her face. "My tools are in that trunk." "Where?" "Her sewing machine, her shears, her mother's Bible, 3 dresses, letters tied in blue string, the proof of her life before smoke." Samuel glanced at her. She hated that he saw how much it hurt. "What sum?" he asked. Pike named an amount twice what freight could be. Samuel's mouth flattened. "You're a thief with paperwork." Pike laughed softly. "And you're a widower with a soft spot. That usually costs more." Samuel took one more step. "Right out. For now." Pike turned his horse, then looked back at Isabel. "Careful, Miss Weatherly. Men like Cannon don't keep women. They bury them in memory." The words struck Samuel harder than any bullet. After Pike left, the yard held its breath. Isabel turned to Samuel, but his face had closed. He walked to the barn and did not come back for supper. That night, Annie cried because her father would not let her bring a plate to him. "He ain't mad at you," Toby told Isabel from the doorway. "He's mad at ghosts." "What ghost?" Toby rubbed the back of his neck. "His wife, Margaret. Fever took her 3 winters ago. He was in Abilene buying stock when it turned. Snow hit. Road closed. By the time he got home, she was gone and Annie had been sitting beside the bed near a day. He never forgave himself for leaving." Isabel looked toward the dark barn. Toby continued, quieter. "He prayed for a wife last month. because Annie asked why other girls had mothers to braid their hair for church. Soon as the words left him, he went white as bone. Said no woman would be brought here to stand in a dead woman's place. Isabel thought of the blue cup, the folded apron, the contract not for hearts. No one can stand in another woman's place, she said. No, Toby answered, but some houses got room for the living too. Trust did not arrive like sunrise. It came in small, stubborn ways. Samuel began leaving kindling stacked by the kitchen door before Isabel woke. Isabel began setting aside coffee before it turned bitter. Annie learned to roll dough and sound out words from the family Bible. The ranch hands stopped treating the kitchen like a bunkhouse corner and started scraping mud off their boots. On Saturdays, Isabel rode to town with Samuel for supplies, sitting straight beside him while whispers moved along the boardwalk. He did not touch her. He did not smile for the watchers, but he no longer let silence answer insults. When Mrs. Abel at the mercantile said, "Some women climb quick when a widower has land," Samuel placed the flour sack down and said, "Miss Weatherly earns wages here, more honest than folks who sell thread dear and gossip free." Mrs. Abel turned red to her collar. Isabel did not thank him until they were outside. Samuel flicked the reins. Wasn't charity, no, truth. That one word warmed her more than praise might have. At church, Reverend Wells preached on the tongue being a small flame that could set a field ablaze. Half the congregation stared at Pike, half stared at Isabel, and he sat between Isabel and Samuel, swinging her feet, proud as a queen. When the hymn began, Isabel sang softly. Samuel did not, but during the final verse, his voice joined, rough and uncertain, and Annie looked up at him as if the roof had opened. The winter came early that year. A blue norther blew across Texas the week before Thanksgiving, dropping sleet over the valley and freezing water in the troughs. Samuel spent long days moving cattle down from exposed pasture. Isabel spent longer ones cooking for chilled men, rubbing Annie's hands warm, and keeping the stove alive through nights when the wind screamed under the eaves. One evening, Samuel stumbled in with ice in his beard and blood on his sleeve. Isabel dropped the kettle. "Sit. It is nothing. You are bleeding on my clean floor." He sat. The cut was deep along his forearm, made by barbed wire or a wicked branch. He watched her wash it. His jaw set. "You've done this before," he said. "My aunt took in laundry for railroad men. Men with wages get hurt in ways men without wages cannot afford. Hold still." He held still until the needle pierced skin. Then his other hand closed on the chair arm. "Afraid of stitches?" she asked. "Afraid of hands leaving?" The truth came out so bare that both of them froze. Isabel tied the thread and wrapped the bandage. "My mother left by dying. My father left by grief. My aunt left by choosing a husband who didn't want another mouth. My uncle left by winter fever. I used to think the leaving meant I was easy to set down." Samuel looked at her. "Now," he asked, "now I think some folks never learn to hold." The stove popped. Wind struck the window. Samuel's voice was low, and some hold so hard they keep everything else out. She looked at the folded apron still resting over the chair in the corner. He followed her gaze. "I should have put it away," he said. "Only if you are ready." "I don't know what ready feels like." "Maybe it feels like letting Annie use the blue cup." Pain crossed his face, but not anger. The next morning, the blue cup sat at Annie's place filled with milk. The child stared at it. Samuel stood behind his chair, hat in hand, as if awaiting judgment. Annie touched the cup with both hands. "Ma want mine." Samuel's voice broke slightly. "No, sweetheart, I don't believe she will." Annie drank from it with solemn care. Then she carried it to Isabel and said, "You should have some too." Isabel looked at Samuel. He gave one small nod. The milk tasted of cream, smoke, and mercy. That same week, Samuel rode to the station and returned with Isabel's trunk. He said nothing at first. He and Toby carried it into the kitchen and set it near the table. The lock had been broken. One hinge hung loose. The leather was stained where snow had melted through. Isabel knelt before it with shaking hands. "My Bible," she whispered. Samuel removed his hat. "Pike sold some contents to Abel. I bought back what I could. The machine was taken apart, but the pieces are there. Your shears too. Letters. Dresses. I couldn't find a blue ribbon packet." Isabel opened the trunk. On top lay her mother's Bible, smoke-scented but whole. Beneath it, wrapped in burlap, the black iron body of her sewing machine waited like a heart removed and returned. She pressed both hands to her mouth. Samuel shifted awkwardly. "It came out of your wages." She laughed once through tears. "Liar. I'll write it down if that helps." "No." Annie threw her arms around Isabel's neck. "Now you can sew pretty things." Isabel held the child and looked up at Samuel. He was watching them with an expression so hungry and frightened that her own heart trembled. "Thank you," she said. He nodded, but his eyes stayed. Snow did not fall often in that part of Texas, but ice could make the land cruel enough. 2 days later, a cowhand from the northern pasture came riding wild. Horse lathered, shouting that cattle had broken fence near Pike's boundary, and men were trapped by a fallen cottonwood. Samuel reached for his coat. Isabel caught his sleeve. "Your arm. It can bleed later. You cannot ride alone. I'm not, I mean in your mind." He stared at her, impatient and confused. She lowered her voice. "This is how grief tricks you. It tells you if you run fast enough this time, you can fix the last time." His face went pale. For a second she feared she had gone too far. Then he looked toward Annie, who stood in the kitchen doorway clutching Dolly. "I have to bring my men home," he said. "Yes, but not because you failed someone else, because they need you now." He breathed once, hard. "Toby," he called. "Hitch the team, Tare. We'll take ropes and lanterns. No one rides past the washout alone." It was the first time Isabel saw him choose caution over punishment. They brought the men home after midnight, half frozen but alive. Samuel came in last, limping, exhausted, his bandage red but not soaked through. Annie ran to him. He knelt and held her tight in front of everyone, no shame in it. Over his daughter's head, his eyes found Isabel. There was gratitude there, and something more dangerous. The person who came back to make Isabel feel worthless did not arrive with thunder. He came on a Sunday morning wearing polished boots and a respectable coat. Silas Weatherly, her cousin, stood outside the church shaking hands as if the town had invited him. He had her father's narrow nose, and none of her father's kindness. When Isabel stepped down from Samuel's wagon, Silas smiled. "There she is," he said, "my unfortunate cousin." Isabel stopped so suddenly, Annie bumped her side. Samuel stepped down behind them. "Who is he?" "Family," Silas answered. Though Isabel never cared much for the duties of blood, Isabel felt old shame rise from a deep well. "You were in San Antonio. I came when I heard Uncle Amos' claim burned. A tragedy. And when I heard you had taken up under a widower's roof, I knew Christian duty required me to fetch you before disgrace settled permanent." Samuel's voice cool. "Miss Weatherly has lawful work at my ranch." Silas gave him a pitying look. "Work? Is that what people are calling it here?" Annie made a small, angry sound. Isabel placed a hand on her shoulder. Reverend Wells approached uneasy. Harlan Pike watched from beneath the church oak, enjoying himself. Silas lifted his voice enough for others to hear. "My cousin has always been difficult. Proud in poverty, quick to refuse guidance. Her uncle wrote me that she imagined herself above marriage, offers, and honest dependence." "That is a lie," Isabel said. "Is it? You refused Mr. Pike's offer to settle the debt through marriage." A murmur ran through the churchyard. Samuel turned his head toward Pike. Pike smiled slightly. Isabel's stomach twisted. There had been an offer, if such filth could be called that. Pike had come after her uncle's burial, and said a woman alone ought to be practical. He would forgive the debt if she married him, and signed the claim over. When she refused, the pressure began. Lost mail, inflated accounts, threats wrapped in legal words. Silas continued, I have arranged a place for her in San Antonio. Laundry work, strict supervision, no more wandering into men's houses. Samuel's hands curled, but Isabel stepped forward before he could speak. You arranged nothing out of love, she said. You refused my letter when Uncle Amos died. You said one more poor relation would inconvenience your wife. Now you come because Mr. Pike sent for you. Silas' smile flickered. Pike pushed away from the tree. Careful, Miss Weatherly. Accusing men without proof seems to be a habit. Isabel's voice shook, but she did not lower it. Then, let truth stand where all can see it. You asked me to marry you for land. I refused. My home burned. My trunk was taken. My name was dirtied. And now my cousin arrives with your words in his mouth. No one spoke. No one spoke. Samuel looked at her then as though seeing not the woman he had sheltered, nor the worker in his kitchen, but the full height of the person she had been fighting to remain. Silas sneered. Fine speech, but you have no standing here. No husband, no father, no property, no reputation beyond what this town chooses to grant. Samuel moved. This time, he did not stand in front of Isabel as if she were helpless. He stood beside her. She has standing with me. The churchyard held its breath. Pike's smile sharpened. That's so? Samuel's face remained calm, but Isabel saw the cost of each word. She saved my child. She works my home honest. She has shown more courage in 2 months than some men spend a lifetime pretending at. Any man who insults her answers to me. Silas looked delighted. Then you claim her. The question was a trap. Everyone knew it. If Samuel said no, Isabel's defense crumbled into pity. If he said yes, the town would turn it into scandal before dinner. Isabel lifted her chin, ready to release him from the snare. But Annie spoke first. Pa, she said, small and clear. Is Miss Isabel still the wife you prayed for? A few women gasped. Samuel closed his eyes. Isabel wished she could disappear. Then he knelt in the frozen mud before his daughter. Right there in front of church, Pike, Silas, Reverend Wells, and half the county. I prayed wrong, he said. Annie's face crumpled. Samuel took her hands. I prayed like a lonely man wanting help without hurt, like a coward wanting God to fill an empty chair and leave my heart alone. That wasn't fair to your ma, to Miss Isabel, or to you. He looked up at Isabel. Her breath caught. If I ever ask Isabel Weatherly to be my wife, he said, it won't be because I need a cook, a mother for my child, or a shield against talk. It will be because I love her as herself. And because she is free to choose me or not. The church bell rope tapped softly in the wind. Isabel felt tears gather, but she would not let them fall before Silas. Reverend Wells stepped forward. That sounds like truth fit for church ground. Pike's expression darkened. Silas gave a brittle laugh. Fine. Let the cowboys speak pretty. Debt remains. Papers remain. Blood family has claim where employers do not. A buggy rattled into the yard before anyone could answer. Mrs. Dobb climbed down with Mr. Abel behind her, red-faced and carrying a ledger. Mrs. Dobb marched straight to Reverend Wells. Tell them, Abel, the mercantile owner, shifted miserably. I don't want trouble. You stole stolen goods from Miss Weatherly's trunk. I didn't know they were stolen. Mrs. Dobb snorted. You knew enough to hide them when Samuel Cannon came asking. Abel opened the ledger with trembling fingers. Pike paid no freight. He told the station clerk the trunk was abandoned and took it. Sold me the machine parts for $2. Pike stepped forward. That is a lie, born of fear. Mrs. Dobb pulled a folded paper from her reticule. Station clerk signed a statement. His wife is my niece. Men forget women write letters. A sound moved through the crowd, not quite outraged yet, but close. Silas' face had gone gray. Samuel stood. Reverend, I want a meeting after service. Church elders, sheriff, anyone with eyes open. Pike laughed. You think a church meeting scares me? No, Samuel said. I think daylight does. The public choice came 3 days later in the schoolhouse, because it was the only building large enough for everyone who wanted to watch a powerful man bleed respectability. Sheriff Tom Braddock sat at the teacher's desk with Pike's papers spread before him. Reverend Wells stood near the stove. Mrs. Dobb occupied the front bench like a cannon, loaded with scripture. Silas sat apart, sweating through his collar. Isabel stood near the window, hands folded, Samuel and Annie behind her. Pike had brought a lawyer from Abilene, a thin man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers. He spoke smoothly of debt, abandonment, lawful seizure, and the unfortunate emotions that clouded female testimony. Isabel listened until the room blurred at the edges. Then Samuel placed a hand, not on her waist, not possessive, not claiming, only steady, on the back of the bench beside her. She drew strength from it without leaning. The lawyer concluded, Miss Weatherly's distress is regrettable, but Mr. Pike acted within rights, assigned by debt. Sheriff Braddock scratched his beard. Debt signed by Amos Weatherly. The lawyer tapped the paper, marked, and witnessed. Mrs. Dobb rose. Amos Weatherly could write his name better than any man in this room. He copied Psalms from my Sunday school when his hands still allowed. That mark is false. Pike rolled his eyes. Old women remember what suits them. Samuel took one step forward. Isabel touched his sleeve. Not yet. Reverend Wells produced a Bible, worn brown at the corners. This was recovered from Miss Weatherly's trunk. Inside are letters written by Amos Weatherly to his niece. His signature appears on 7. The sheriff compared them. His brow lowered. The lawyer's confidence thinned. Then Isabel spoke. Mr. Pike did not want debt paid. He wanted land. My uncle's claim has a spring under the East Ridge. Railroad surveyors camped there in September. They told him a spur might come through if water proved steady. Men began muttering. Land with water was one thing. Land near rail was another. Pike's face flushed. You know nothing of rail business. I know what I cook supper for, Isabel said. Surveyors talk when they think women hear only plates. Toby Fitch stood in the back. I saw Pike's riders near Weatherly Place the morning of the fire. One carried a coal oil tin. Pike pointed. Disgruntled hand. I work for Cannon, Toby said. And I ain't disgruntled. Unless supper's late. A nervous laugh broke the tension. Then Annie stepped from behind Samuel, clutching Dolly. Samuel reached for her, but Isabel gently shook her head. Annie walked to the front and held up the doll. Miss Isabel gave me her shawl when I was cold. It had a burn hole, not little like a stove spark, big, and she smelled like smoke before she found me. That means the fire hurt her first. She didn't make it to Trickpaw. The room softened in a way no adult argument could have done. Pike looked toward the door. Sheriff Braddock stood. Harlan Pike, you'll remain while I review these papers. And if forgery or theft is proved, you'll answer. Pike's lawyer gathered his documents quickly, as if paper could catch disease. Silas rose too. I want no part in illegal dealings. Isabel looked at him. You already had one. He stopped. You came to shame me because it profited you, she said. You called it family duty. I call it cowardice. Silas had no answer. Pike lunged toward the door then, fast for a man of his size. Samuel caught him by the coat and slammed him against the wall hard enough to rattle the slate board. For one wild second, all the grief and fury Samuel had spent years burying blazed through him. Isabel saw he wanted to do more. Much more. Pa! Annie cried. Samuel froze. His fist was twisted in Pike's coat. Pike's eyes bulged with fear. Isabel stepped close. Samuel. He looked at her as if dragged from a fire. This is not how you keep us, she said. Us. The word reached him. Slowly, he released Pike and stepped back. Sheriff Braddock took Pike by the arm. I'll keep him. Samuel turned away, shaking. Outside, the town gathered under a hard blue sky. People who had whispered now tried to meet Isabel's eye. with apology. Mrs. Abel came first, twisting her apron. "Miss Weatherly, I spoke poorly." "Yes," Isabel said. Mrs. Abel blinked, unused to apology not being accepted before offered. "I am sorry." Isabel looked at Samuel, then at Annie, then back to the woman. "Then, speak well. Next time someone weaker than you is being used for sport." Mrs. Abel nodded, ashamed. Reverend Wells approached. "The church owes you protection sooner than it gave it." Isabel's voice softened. "Then give it sooner to the next woman." Samuel stood apart, near the hitching rail, face pale. When Isabel approached, he could not look at her. "I nearly beat him in front of Annie. You stopped because you told me to, because you heard me." He shook his head. "There's a mean place in me. There is a hurt place in you that learned to wear meanness like a coat." His eyes lifted. She continued, "But Annie needs more than a father who protects her from bad men. She needs one who comes back from anger." Samuel looked toward his daughter, who was letting Mrs. Dobb inspect Dolly's button eye. "I don't know if I can be gentle enough. You were gentle enough to open the door." His voice dropped. "I opened it because Annie begged, and kept it open because you chose." A long silence passed between them. Then Samuel said, "I meant what I said at the church. I know I won't ask from need. Good." His mouth twitched faintly, almost a smile. "You are a hard woman to make a speech to. I have survived too many speeches. Then I'll wait until my actions have better manner." She did smile then. "That would be wise." Pike's hold on Sweetwater Crossing broke faster than anyone expected once men began looking at his papers in daylight. The forged debt, the stolen trunk, the false claim, and the testimony about coal oil were enough to bring charges. His riders scattered by sundown. Silas left town the next morning without farewell, though he sent a letter weeks later containing 3 lines of apology and 7 lines explaining himself. Isabel used it to start the stove. The Weatherly claim was returned to her, though the house was gone. The spring remained. So did the East Ridge, the blackened stones, and one stubborn rosebush her mother had planted from a cutting, carried west in a damp cloth. Samuel drove her there after the first haul. Isabel stood among the ashes while Annie searched for pretty rocks. The wind moved gently through the charred cottonwoods. For a while, no one spoke. "I can help rebuild," Samuel said. "I know not to own it. I know that too." He shifted beside her. "What do you want?" It was the first time in years anyone had asked, without already holding an answer. Isabel looked at the spring flashing silver in the sun. She thought of a house of her own, a sewing room, a garden, a gate no man could close on her. Then she thought of Annie's small hand in hers, Samuel's rough voice joining hymns, the blue cup on the table, bread rising in a warm kitchen, while wind pressed at the windows. "I want to keep the land," she said, "not because I wish to live alone on ashes, but because no one should be able to steal the ground under a woman and call it law." Samuel nodded. "Then keep it, and I want to work." "You do." "I mean more than cooking for hungry men who praise beans like poetry." "Sweetwater needs a dressmaker. Women ride hours for proper seams. I could set up in your old smokehouse if you still mean to repair the roof." "My smokehouse." "You said you wanted actions with better manner." This time, he did smile. "I did." So Isabel kept the Weatherly claim, leased its grazing to Samuel for a fair price, written in clear ink, and opened a sewing room in the repaired smokehouse at Cannon Ranch. Women who had once whispered came with cloth and measurements. Some apologized, some did not. Isabel treated every hem according to the quality of the fabric, not the character of the wearer. Though Mrs. Dobbs said that showed more Christian discipline than she herself possessed. Samuel changed slowly, which made the change true. He moved Margaret's apron from the kitchen chair to a cedar chest, not hidden but resting. He told Annie stories about her mother without turning away. He sang again, first under his breath in the barn, then loud enough that Toby claimed the milk cow gave extra out of appreciation. He still went quiet when fear took him. He still held himself stiff when happiness came too near. But he learned to say, "I am afraid," instead of "enough." Spring laid green over the valley. On a Sunday after church, Samuel drove Isabel and Annie home by the long road, where bluebonnets spread like pieces of sky fallen to earth. Annie fell asleep between them, her head against Isabel's arm, Dolly in her lap. Samuel stopped the wagon beneath a live oak near the creek. Isabel looked at him. "Is something wrong?" "No." He climbed down, came around, and offered his hand. She took it. They walked a little way from the wagon while Annie slept in sight. Samuel removed his hat. "I have practiced this badly many times," he said. "That sounds promising." He gave her a nervous look, and she softened. "Go on." He looked toward the water, then back at her. "I loved Margaret. I will always honor what she was. For a long time, I thought that meant locking every door she once walked through. I made a shrine of grief and called it faithfulness. Annie paid for it. So did anyone who tried to come near." Isabel listened, still as sunlight. "You came to my door with my child, and nothing else," he continued. "I offered you caution when you needed kindness. I let a town wound you because I feared what defending you would ask of me. I am sorry for that." Isabel Weatherly, not as a speech. "As a debt, I mean to spend my life repaying better than Pike ever knew how." Tears warmed her eyes. Samuel reached into his coat and took out not a ring, but her mother's silver thimble, the one she had thought lost from her torn pocket that first night. It had been cleaned and polished, bright as moonlight. "I found it in the wagon after we rode to town," he said. "I kept meaning to return it. Then I kept waiting for the right moment. That was selfish." She took it slowly. "I thought it was gone. I know." His voice roughened. "I don't want to keep what belongs to you. Not your land, not your work, not your name, not your choice." He reached into his pocket again. This time there was a plain gold ring resting in his palm. "I am asking now, not because Annie needs a mother, though she loves you fierce. Not because the house needs bread, though no man should live on my biscuits. Not because talk needs answering. I am asking because I love you. Because the door you walked through became home only after you had the courage to stand inside it as yourself." Isabel looked at the ring, then at the man holding it with a trembling hand. "Samuel Cannon," she said, "do you know I might argue with you? I'm counting on it. I might keep my sewing room. I already fixed the roof twice. It had better be used. I might grieve my own dead and keep my own counsel when I need to. I will sit nearby and not demand entrance." She smiled through tears. "And Annie might use the blue cup?" His eyes shone. "Annie might use every cup in the house." Isabel held out her hand. "Yes," she said. "Not because I was begged for. Not because I was prayed into a vacancy. Because I choose you, and I choose that child, and I choose the home we can build with doors open wide." Samuel slid the ring onto her finger with a reverence that made her heart ache. Behind them, a sleepy voice called, "Did she say yes?" They turned. Annie was sitting up in the wagon, hair wild, doll dangling by one arm. Samuel laughed then. A real laugh, deep and startled and alive. She said yes. Annie scrambled down and ran so fast her bonnet flew off. Isabel caught her, and Samuel caught them both, wrapping his arms around the family that had come to him by storm, smoke, fear, and mercy. They married June beneath a live oak by the creek. Reverend Wells spoke the words. Mrs. Dobb cried into a handkerchief and denied it loudly. Toby gave Annie flowers and told her she was now official boss of the ranch, which she accepted as only her due. Mrs. Abel made the cake and did not gossip over it once. Isabel wore a dress she had sewn herself from cream muslin, with tiny blue flowers stitched at the cuffs. Around her neck hung her mother's thimble on a ribbon. Annie carried the blue cup filled with wildflowers and placed it on a small table near a framed likeness of Margaret. Because love, Isabel had learned, did not ask the past to vanish before the future could enter. After the vows, Samuel brought Isabel to the house. He stopped at the threshold where she had once stood, soaked, shamed, and half-frozen. Annie squeezed between them. "This is where I asked," she said. "Yes," Isabel whispered. Samuel opened the door, but he did not step through first. He looked at Isabel with all the tenderness he had once been afraid to spend. "Mrs. Cannon," he said, "will you come home?" Isabel looked into the kitchen, where bread cooled on the table, where sunlight touched the cedar chest, where 3 cups waited side by side. She looked at the child who had mistaken rescue for answered prayer, and somehow been wiser than all of them. She looked at the cowboy who had opened a door imperfectly, then learned to keep opening it with courage. She stepped inside. Years later, folks in Sweetwater Crossing still told the story of the night little Annie Cannon found a soot-covered woman on the road and asked if she was the wife her pa had prayed for. Some told it like a miracle, some told it like romance. Mrs. Dobb told it like proof that children saw straight through what adults tried to complicate. Isabel told it differently. She told Annie, and later the children who came after, that a prayer was not always answered by giving a person exactly what they imagine. Sometimes it came as work, sometimes as a stranger with bruised hands, sometimes as a second chance that embarrassed pride before healing the heart. Sometimes it knocked softly, sometimes it arrived carrying a lost child through rain. And when the wind rose over the Texas grass and evening settled gold along the Cannon Ranch, Samuel would stand on the porch with Isabel beside him, Annie running ahead toward the barn, supper warm inside, and every door of the house open to the light. He had not opened his door to a perfect wife, nor she to a perfect man. He had opened it to mercy, and mercy, once welcomed, had stayed forever.